go.
There we go.
Oh, wow. That's never happened to me before.
Oh, I get that. I get that whenever someone hits record. I don't know why, but I do. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well, everybody, welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. Very happy with the guest I have on today. We're joined by Nora Loreto. Nora is based in Quebec City. She's a Canadian journalist, so this is our All Things Canada edition. She's a independent freelance journalist as well as a union activist, and she's also the co-host of the brilliant podcast, topical podcast program, Sandy and Nora, with her co-host Sandy Hudson, who's a member of Black Lives Matter Canada. So yeah, so let's get into it. So first of all, Miss Loreto, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks.
It's it's a real honor to have you. And my first question that I have to ask you, we were talking off the air about the coronavirus pandemic, but we're not going to get into that. But I did want to ask you, what's the latest going on in Quebec with the justice, the calls for justice with that Indigenous woman who went into hospital and was badly mistreated by the staff. She even filmed the racist treatment she was subjected to. That led to what was already huge protests against police brutality and institutional racism. Now, what's the latest going on with what's the latest going on with that case?
Yeah, so you're talking about the death of Joyce Echaquan. She was an Atikamekw woman from the region that's kind of between Montreal and Quebec City. The hospital is the Joliet Hospital in the city called Joliet or Joliet. And right now there's a coroner's inquest that's going on to figure out what happened. Now, right after her death, there was a lot of activity on Facebook from folks around Joliet saying that the hospital is notorious for this. Like the kind of treatment that Atikamekw and other Indigenous people had faced and experienced at the Joliet Hospital was pretty known. And even more concerning.
So it's not an aberration. This wasn't an aberration.
Not at all. And even more concerning was that there had been other stories of Indigenous people being given morphine when they said that they couldn't take morphine. And so that's how Joyce had died. So she filmed the nurses mocking her and being racist towards her in her last moments. And then she died from what we're going to find out in the coroner's inquest exactly. But it sounds like that she was given morphine and she was allergic to it or couldn't have it for whatever reason. And that's probably what killed her. And since then, there have been other cases of racialized women specifically who've died in very bizarre circumstances in Quebec hospitals. And also today, information came out that the post-operative outcomes of Indigenous people across Canada, so now I'm not just talking about Quebec, but across the whole country, are 30% more likely to be injured or to have negative post-operative outcomes than non-Indigenous people. Yeah. And honestly, like, I mean, I look at that, I thought 30% was honestly low considering like how much medical racism there is. I would have expected that number to be higher.
Yeah,
but it's still, I mean, 30, like that's unbelievable. I mean, it's unbelievable in the way I use the word, like completely rhetorically.
Well, it's a national disgrace. Yeah.
So the coroner's inquest is on now. I think it's not going to just be an exercise of like saving face or trying to erase the problems at the Joliet Hospital. I actually think, like, following some of the reporting that I've seen from one journalist at CBC Quebec, Julia Page, it seems like the nurses and the medical staff are saying, no, there's racism here, and this is what it looks like, and this is what it looked like with Joyce, and this is what it's looked like in other cases. The real question will be what happens with this information. I have no confidence in our government to do anything useful with it, right? Our Minister of Aboriginal Affairs is a cop, so that's super weird. And he was only appointed to that position like 6 months ago. And, you know, we've got a government that like is saying there's no such thing as racism. There's racism in Quebec, but there's no systemic racism in Quebec, except, okay, we'll have a committee to investigate racism in Quebec. And the committee will take a systemic approach. We will have people from every department. We'll look at education. We'll look at the business world. But this is not systemic. These are not systemic things, right? You're just like, you people I mean, it's a clown parade of like racism, but also a complete like ignorance around racism as well. It's just like the two things.
Well, and then the other funny thing is I remember talking with Dimitri Lascaris when he was still running for the Green, when he was still running for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada, and I asked him, like, don't you think it's bizarre that here we have like nationwide protests that's happening in Canada, not just in solidarity for George Floyd, but also protesting against systemic racism and police brutality towards Blacks and Indigenous people. And Francois Legault, like just several months like before, like was giving an apology at the Quebec National Assembly for centuries and years of systemic racism. And now all of a sudden we went we went from that in Quebec to to Yves Francois Blanchette of the Quebec Bloc Party saying that there's no institutional racism in Quebec. That's a Canada problem, not a Quebec problem.
Well, and even like just another example of that is I'm part of the group of people. We have a citizens committee in Quebec City that organizes and memorializes the shooting that happened at the mosque in Saint Foy. It's not very far from where I am. And
which we're going to get into, which we're definitely going to get into. Yeah.
And so every year we have a memorial, and the premier comes awkwardly. I mean, the first year it was a different premier, and then it was Francois Legault. And so we had this really bizarre situation where we have this incredible memorial. It's very touching, 600 people all crammed together in the atrium at the university here in Laval. And the premier makes his remarks, and everyone's like, wow, okay, that was surprising. And then 2 days later, he's like, there's no Islamophobia in Quebec. What are you talking about? There's no Islamophobia. And we're just like, what? You were just here. So, then we write an open letter and we condemn him and blah, blah, blah. And I think he's kind of backpedaled on that a little bit, but it's just, as I said, it's a clown show. It's like, this is what happens when your prime minister, we'd say in French, your premier, like his credentials is founding an airline. Right. Yeah. That's his credentials. Is he is really good at founding an airline called Air Transat. And that's it.
well, unfortunately, that is the problem with, and it's this is not a unique thing. This is not just the problem with Quebec nationalism, which in the beginning was not a kind of a xenophobic, Islamophobic project. But I think that is the problem, though. I think that is though the problem with the nationalism, and I don't know, I don't know if Quebec is just way too influenced by French politics when they watch when they watch and consume French media, because you have in France you have you also have xenophobia, systemic racism, police brutality, Islamophobia, and so forth. But and it's to the point where I understand how people want separation of church and state and stuff like that, but also I'm not going to get a heart attack just because I see a Muslim woman with with a headscarf, or a Sikh man wearing wearing a turban. But it seems like in France, and it seems to be a very similar thing in Quebec when I do observe Canadian politics, that there is just this extreme form of liberalism that's not really liberal. Well, it's liberal bigotry, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I mean, if you just can appreciate that Quebec is sandwiched between France and the United States, right? That is how Quebec's political culture is formed, and so not only do you have kind of the worst elements of both the United States and France colliding.
Yeah.
Right, where people speak English and where they consume American media and they consume French media from France. But then you also have the very legitimate and necessary work of defending the French language and the culture of Quebec from Canadian hegemony, right? And so it's a very it means that people on the left who are involved in the sovereignty movement, or who are active in any kind of nation building exercise, has to have anti-racism really built into its core, because without that, the dérapage, as we say, the slide away from anti-racism and towards ethnic nationalism, it's very easy. It's very, very
Oh
you
yeah.
know, I just wrote about this within Quebec City, and I imagine we'll talk about it, so I won't get into it too much yet. But when you've got like the left-wing party here has a membership where only 4% identify as non-white. Only 4% of
Wow.
the left-wing party, right? And then you add like the white anglophones that are in the party. We're a major minority as well, but like we're still white, right? So we still like understand all of the ways that the like kind of speak the common racist kind of parlance of white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
But we're still outside because we're never going to be accepted as being part of this culture. Our children might be, which is different than folks who are not white, right? But and so it's a real struggle because people in this province on the left don't understand that. I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of having to actively fight against racism rather than just saying, well, we're not a racist party and that's good enough. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, we are, again, France is here, the United States is here, and we're actively asserting nationhood in a colonial state.
Yeah, I'm based in Belgium, and we have these stupid language wars that go on between the south where I'm based, Wallonia, and then Flanders, the north, which is Dutch speaking or Flemish speaking as they prefer to say it, and once upon a time the French speaking elites and like the French the Walloons were like the dominant people who like discriminated against like the Flemish, who had to learn French if they wanted to simply get like a job or simply get access to legal defense and all the stuff that a lot of us take for granted. But now like the tables have turned completely, where Flanders is like the more it's more like economically advanced. Like Wallonia still is struggling with like pit closures and stuff like that. And now it's like like the Flemish are now there's like a reverse racism where like the Flemish pass all of these strict language laws and so forth. But Wallonia, because and I'm sure you probably experienced the same thing in like Quebec, and we all experience it because of France. There's a bit of an arrogance on their part, because it's like, if you don't speak French and if you don't have like French at the level they demand you, well, you're also sort of like discriminated against and disenfranchised. And like I'm just like at a point where it's like, can we just give like Flanders like its independence so we can like just so I can like stop hearing about this bullshit and like I'll happily like move out of Belgium then.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean the language wars are funny because the Quebec government just unveiled its plans to modify Bill 101, which is our big language law. And it's funny because there's not much in it from the perspective of like a linguistic minority to be mad about. There's a lot of it to be mad about if you're a francophone, actually, because they're trying to limit the participation of francophone students in English colleges. But for an anglophone, that just means that there's going to be more space in English colleges for me to get my kids into. So it's just this weird, like, they're only doing it because it's an attack on public education, and it's going to allow the elites to go to private English colleges because those are not touched by Law 101. And then that's it. Because the idea is, of course, if you can learn English while going to college and you want to be a scientist or a doctor, it's like the common language of global science, right? So it's kind of a way to get a little bit advanced when you're at 17 and you can go to college and learn English. But again, it's a weird attack on francophones who want to do that, because anglophones are going to speak English. We speak English, and we're in a fight to learn better French. But if you go to the public school system, you learn French. I mean, you learn French, but you learn French.
And just before I get on to feminism, because you've recently done a book about feminism, then I have to ask this $1 million question. If another referendum was to ever come about in Canada, and this time the Quebec nationalists say, we promise this will be the last round. If we lose, we'll never talk about like independence again. If like another independence referendum was to happen, would you be supportive of Quebec's right to secede, or you sort of like neutral, like you sort of don't care either way?
Oh no, I'm definitely a sovereigntist. I'm definitely a sovereigntist.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see any progressive argument in favor of maintaining the Canadian Federation because they're both colonial projects. And so the
Yeah.
real question is, what's the colonial project I want to be more involved in? The one that started 100 years before my birth, or the one that's starting when I'm an adult and I can actually do something about it, right? And so I think that there's a lot more opportunity. And I say this, I actually think that this is a discussion for all provinces, right? Like, I don't think the Canadian Federation should exist at all. I think that there needs to be a completely new arrangement in this country that gives massive swaths of land back to the like traditional stewards of those lands.
That's the Communist Party of Canada's position. Actually,
Yeah.
is that like, hey, we don't mind if the country is united, but we actually believe in giving nationhood, true nationhood, land rights and everything back to the Indigenous people. And if they want to secede from the Federation, they can secede from the Federation. If Quebec wants to secede from the Federation, they can. And then it's up to them and their Indigenous people. Okay, how do we go forward? And I must say, I'm much more sympathetic to Quebec independence than I am towards, like, Catalan independence. And like, but even then, I mean, like, I'm not a fan of like Flemish nationalism, but like, if Flanders has a referendum and the majority of Flemish people want to secede, well, you know what? It's better to have an amicable divorce than a really unhappy marriage. And self-determination. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's like a left society that's going to be built or a rightward society that's going to be built. Like, self-determination, it's all about like self-determination. So is that how you...
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that, and actually it's interesting because the Communist Party of Canada's positions changed a lot, right? Like, they at one point were very opposed to sovereignty because, I mean, there's a whole analysis about the Canadian state and how whatever, which is, I mean, it's an interesting perspective to consider for sure. But I think that if we're talking about any kind of democratic participation of people, if people want to draw up a new constitution, they have that right. There's no question about that. And the reality of federalism in Canada is that federalism is much more of a damaging structure than it is a supportive structure to life in Canada. And I think that the pandemic made that clear, that in ways that, I've been writing about this for years, being like, federalism sucks. We need to talk about sovereignty. We need to talk about sovereignty. The pandemic really showed off why that's been so bad, because, you can look at Quebec and all of our social programs that are good, the ones that are really, really strong and good, our public auto insurance, our access, even though our language laws are shitty, there's still better access to learning French than you'll get learning English anywhere else in Canada. There's still a public daycare system. There's a public college system that's free or almost free. And the university system is still very inexpensive. And these are all through the perspective of Quebec's sovereignty. They're nation building projects, right? You can't make the same argument for free daycare in Saskatchewan, because then, like, well, what's the big deal? We're all Canadian, right? So sovereignty has actually opened up a lot of possibilities that could be left or right. They're absolutely left or right. But because the social democratic tendency within the sovereignty movement has been the one that has had more power, right? Talking about the 1970s and René Lévesque and the Parti Québécois, that the power has been mostly used for good at the state level. Now we're seeing the movements having these far right tendencies, but even the far right isn't really finding itself mostly in the sovereignty movement. What we're seeing much more is the nationalism of the CAQ, which is currently in power, that looks a lot more like the nationalism of the 1940s and early 1950s in Quebec, where it was like, we actually support the Canadian state, and we support the Canadian state because that's the best way to organize capital, right? So it's very interesting to have the discussion sovereignty left versus right versus sovereignty federalism just as being like its own political orientation. But I'm much more happy to have a debate with the right wing of the sovereignty movement than I am with the right wing of the Canadian nationalists in Quebec. I love the debate with anybody.
And then on top of that, it's like, like my Marxist comrades who believe in a united Canada and so forth. Okay, like that's all very good, like, intentions. Like, I understand those arguments completely, but in the end of the day, like, if you just have one province of Canada that speaks French and the rest is all English speaking, and you have Quebecers who make an effort to learn. Well, they have to make an effort to learn English, otherwise they're not going to advance in Canada. There's not that same level going on in English-speaking Canada, right?
Right. Yeah. No. Exactly. It's not equal. It's not even. But also these discussions.
Unless you're running for prime minister, then that's a.
Well, yeah. I mean, you should probably speak a bit of French for that. But a lot of these conversations also flatten the regional differences in English Canada in a way that I also don't think is super helpful, because there are Northern Ontario is still basically like a colony of Bay Street. What does an independent Northern Ontario look like from Bay Street? That's a really interesting discussion. What does an independent Atlantic Canada look like from the rest of Canada? Is that even viable, or is it such a reliant region of Canada on the rest of Canada for transfer payments that's the only way that they can exist, is through being part of Canada? So there's a lot of very interesting discussions that I think that when we say I prefer a united Canada, that you kind of close the door to a lot of very interesting progressive possibilities. And I don't see those possibilities being actually possible in a united Canada because of the way that federalism, provincial governments, municipalities are just able to never do anything. Everything can always be vetoed. Everything is always someone else's fault. There's literally no.
But we at 1+1 and Sandy and Nora, we do not endorse the Wexit movements.
Well, no, it's funny though too, right? Because it's what could a relationship look like, right? Are we talking about independent sovereign nations? Are we talking about some sort of arrangement where everyone has a common citizenship, but that the partnerships are completely different? I mean, you can't even export alcohol from Quebec to Ontario, right? So there's so many funny things about the Federation that are so weird and old that what we actually need is a serious constitutional discussion in Canada, and the assumed outcome should not be, and therefore a united Canada in the way that it exists today is what we need. There's so many interesting ways that we could actually reinvigorate democracy and really pull down into regional kind of formations of people all across Canada that would be far more democratic, far more responsible, democratically responsible to the people in that region, and not really having this arbiter in Ottawa to be able to say, yes, we agree, no, we disagree, and all this kind of stuff. It's the best argument that people try to come up with who are federalists are okay, well, Quebec's Bill 21, the racist religious symbols bill, well, we need United Canada so that Ottawa can intervene. And it's Ottawa intervening is not a good idea. It's just gonna make people really love Bill 21 more. So what we need.
Oh yeah, which is why Justin Trudeau, even though when he's debating to become prime minister and get reelected, all of a sudden he's yes, a federal government is going to have to intervene in Quebec because they're violating our Canadian citizens, right. but now he's done a complete 180 where I think just today or yesterday he was praising the new language laws, and it's not like he's done that much to actually even intervene. Even if he was to intervene, that's only going to inflame Quebec nationalism even more, which was why Jagmeet Singh was in this awkward position where he was against the bill, but he knows full well that if he goes really hard, anti extreme ban on headscarves, that's just going to inflame Quebec nationalism even more. And he's already gone enough racial harassment for that.
Yeah, well, and also the NDP has no ground game in this province. So Singh, anything that Singh says is going to become his problem directly. There's no ground game here for people to convince others about the position and introduce their guy to them. There's just and this is, that's the problem with the NDP. They've never understood Quebec. I mean, they thought in 2011 when they swept the province that it was a symbol that the sovereignty movement was dead. And it was have you talked to a single Quebecer about this theory of yours? And I remember having arguments with people in British Columbia about this. And oh yeah, sovereignty's dead. And it's sovereignty will never die. This is a French-speaking province. When I moved here, I was surprised when I pulled out Canadian money at the store. I was oh, I got the wrong money. I should it is a different world. And no amount of pretending that it's not will make that go away. The rest
exactly.
of Quebec.
It goes back to that documentary that Paul Jay, who later founded The Real News and now Analysis.news, that documentary he did, Never Ending Referendum. And that goes back to, what I was saying about about Belgium, this unhappy marriage between Wallonia and Flanders. Like, I'm tired of hearing about it. It's better to have an amicable divorce than an unhappy marriage. And the sovereignty, like you said, the independence movement in Quebec is never going to go away unless, okay, we may have won this referendum and that referendum, but there's obviously like a movement there. Quebec is obviously like a nation within a nation. And then there's another nation within all of that, which is the Indigenous Quebecers.
11 of them in Quebec,
So give them independence. That way we can just stop like this endless argument but at least Quebec keeps Canada on its toes, though.
There is that. I mean, there is that. Yeah. No, and everybody needs a foil, right? Everyone needs a foil. Everyone needs an opponent. And it would be very interesting to see what would happen to Canada if Quebec wasn't part of it. It would change everything. But
yeah.
Anyway.
All righty. Well, okay. So let's talk about feminism, because you recently did a new book on feminism, and I don't have the title, but remind me what the title of your book is.
Yeah, it's called Take Back the Fight, Organizing Feminism in the Digital Age.
Fantastic. And I still need to get your book, by the way, but I'm actually going to be I'm actually going to be reading a bunch of feminist books later on in the year. So I want that to be like part of the marathon. So talking about feminism. So the first question that I wanted to ask you then is, what to you is feminism, and what are some of the everyday sexism that you think that women are still subjected to, and that you notice in your in your own life, which gets overlooked?
Yeah, I think that, like, in the simplest terms, feminism, or let's say sexism, patriarchy, is a form of control, and it's a form of control that can be wielded very easily over half the population and then the other half of the population. It's just an ideology of control. And so fighting against that, so feminism is trying to identify that as being an ideology of control, and then how in all of the different ways in our lives that control still exists. And so, I'm writing against a moment where feminism has been popularized, where average people would say that without hesitation they're feminists and they support a lot of the demands that they might imagine are associated with the feminist movement, while at the same time that feminist organizing has never been so weak in Canada, has never been so absent, has never been so disjointed. A lot of the feminist action in this country is service delivery, which is really important, but it means that the people who are doing the service delivery, right, staffing shelters or holding someone's hand through a really difficult situation, those are not the same people that are going to have the time to do the advocacy, because when someone's knocking at your door saying I need help, you don't have any time to do organizing in a meeting necessarily. And so that's really been a problem, because a lot of the feminist services that are necessary that the state should be providing are being provided by a professionalized feminist service offering, right? So that's in the kind of the basic kind of context in which I'm writing. And so how is this like day to day? I mean, it's, you still see like Canadian women have not advanced to the ways to like the people like have always said we should. As I said earlier, there's still no free childcare. The pandemic has obviously shown that women are doing far more work of the family and losing their jobs more because of the pandemic. There's a ton of pay gaps that you can look at that demonstrate all of this. But the reality, I think, is that we still have this concept of feminism being this mostly white struggle. And so in this book, what I thought was really important was to talk about how, you can look at different measures like violence against women. Violence against women in Canada has been on a long decline since the 1960s. And so that's a good sign. But if you take white women out of that, violence against racialized women and especially Indigenous women has been going up. And so, like, how would anyone then arrive in 2021 and say, things are better today than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago? The only person that can say that is a white woman. And it's still us, white women, that define how good or where our progress is. And so I really wanted to poke holes into that. And I really wanted to just try to like reorient feminism in a moment of neoliberalism. I did an event a couple weeks ago, and the person who hosted the event was like, you talk more about neoliberalism in this book than you did about patriarchy. You said neoliberalism far more times than you said patriarchy. And I was like, wow, like you're so smart for seeing that. I've never even thought of that, right? Like the awe of this question or
Now,
comment.
did you take offense to that? Like, were you a bit,
No. It's a diagnosis. It's just a diagnosis of my book. And she's right. And she wasn't saying it like, wow, you've like really betrayed feminism by only talking about neoliberalism.
Okay.
She was saying that this is such an interesting way to talk about feminism. And so like the book culminates in the argument that anything that isn't anti-capitalist, anti-racist, and anti-colonial is not feminism. Like it's just not. It's not going to get at the core problems that plague all women, regardless of your identity. But if it isn't literally starting on the basis of being anti-capitalist, anti-colonial, anti-racist, you'll never actually get at the issues that we're trying to get at for everybody.
That's fantastic. I'm actually so glad that you mentioned that, and let me see that. Let me see that actually leads to my second question. Well, actually, yeah. Let me skip these two then. No, but actually going back to what you were saying, and and this actually is a continuation of what we were talking about with the ban on Muslim women wearing their headscarf, which is talk more about Western feminism and their problem with what I call liberal bigotry and chauvinism when it comes to the ban on Muslim women who want to wear the headscarf. And I'm not talking about like the niqab and the burqa. I'm just talking about like like the headscarf. And
or even niqab. I mean, I know a lot of people that choose to wear niqab too, right? Yeah. So the Western, I think it's interesting when we say Western feminism. I think probably a better way to define it is like, in that term is colonialism, right? When we talk about Westernness, Western nations, we're talking about colonial nations. We're talking about settler states. And it's funny because, and I've just been arguing about this in Quebec. So Quebec is one of the provinces with the strongest feminist movement still. But there's still an uncertainty around how do we talk about colonialism, which implicates so many women, right? Which so many women are involved in the continued act of colonial violence. We're just talking about Joyce Echaquan. There's two women that were insulting her, and who knows, probably a woman that administered the morphine, right? Judging by who staffs hospitals, right? Mm-hmm. And so, like in Quebec, the feminist movement is so super strong, but there's not much of an analysis about the fact that women's roles in this province, the patriarchy that grew out of the colonial project, started in the 1600s when women were imported from France to Quebec to populate this province. And the women's role in this province was colonial, was to tend to children, have as many children as possible. And it was in those colonial structures that white Quebecois women were oppressed, right? They were oppressed for the colony to become successful. But we don't have a straight line between that like origin and today, even though there's a very obvious straight line. All of feminism in Quebec has been fighting against those traditional roles, the Catholic Church, all of the control that was forced onto women that grew out of the colonial project to populate this province. And so why is it so hard for feminists here and everywhere else in Canada? I mean, it's similar. I mean, the way that the colonies grew were a bit different outside of Quebec. But why is that not at the center of feminism? Looking at the whole reason we exist in these structures today was to create a successful colonial project. Like,
interesting.
Colonization should be at the center of how we talk about this then. And Indigenous women have been saying this for years and years and years. And there's tons of history of Indigenous women fighting against mainstream women's movement. And then of course, once you have immigration to Canada, that's mostly from the Caribbean and from the United States, of women, mostly Black women who were doing service work in the 1970s and 1980s, then you get this incredible richness, even more richness of the feminist analysis of what does racism, sexism, colonialism look like when it's all mixed together. And this is what it looks like. It looks like someone living in someone's house to take care of someone's children. It looks like making less than minimum wage. It looks like not being allowed to sponsor your family. You have to work from here and give money back to another country, and they'll never be able to come here. You'll only be able to go home and never immigrate here, right? And so these are the core ideas that are in feminism, but still what we understand in Canada is my right as a white woman or as any woman to break the glass ceiling or to become the CEO of some bullshit company or my right to get free childcare, right? And it's like, anyway, so these are the themes that I try to think of.
But that's but the sort of liberal bigotry that exists amongst okay, dare I say, like the white, left-wing feminist. I mean, I would imagine. I mean, I'm sure their argument to the pair of us why they do support like a ban on, headscarves and so forth like that is because for them they think Islam and they think patriarchy on steroids. Like they think of the Taliban, they think of the Islamic Republic of Iran, they think of like Muslim Brotherhood communities that exist in Egypt and across the Middle East. So yeah, so when they think of of Islam and they probably think of oppression of women, and the headscarf is a symbol of a man pointing a gun to a woman's head and saying you need to wear the headscarf. And okay, maybe there's some elements of truth to that, but I'm pretty sure, I mean, having interviewed Manar Adley, the editor-in-chief of Mint Press News, and I'm pretty sure you probably experienced the same thing. When you actually meet with Muslim women at like a Palestine solidarity event or anything like that, these people they're choosing to wear the headscarf because it's simply a part of their culture, and for them, like they just have a difference of I guess like for them, like feminism isn't like isn't like taking off like the headscarf and like wearing whatever you want. It is about like equality. It is about respecting mother care, matriarchy, and stuff like that. It's not it's not the kind of stereotype that we have where like, oh, anytime like a Muslim woman is wearing like a headscarf, then they must have been like coerced into doing it from from somebody who subscribes to like ISIS or the Muslim Brotherhood, right?
Yeah, I mean, so that was much more of a prominent attitude in Canada and in Quebec specifically. I would say like maybe a decade ago. Within feminist spaces, there's been a lot of work that racialized feminists, especially Muslim feminists and feminists who wear hijab, have done to really push people's analysis. And so in Quebec, where that's the biggest fight. I mean, the rest of Canada, there's much less of a fight around hijab. You would not find feminists making that argument. It's mostly like right-wing women that would make it under a feminist analysis, but
okay, interesting.
They're racist. It's not that was the argument that like the Feminist Federation of Quebec made in like the mid 90s, and then they kind of held on to those kinds of ideas until the 2000s, the mid 2000s, and then it started to really shift. So that's good. Like there's been an evolution, and there's been an involvement of racialized women within the feminist movement to be able to be like, this is bullshit. Like you can condemn Iran all you want. You can condemn Saudi Arabia all you want. We are not Iran and we're not Saudi Arabia. We are a different nation. And if you're talking about someone being coerced into doing anything, that's patriarchy. It's not a cultural thing. Every culture has patriarchy in some way in Canada, right? Mm-hmm. So those kinds of discussions are more, I would say, advanced. The racism now, I would say, is much more just in like refusing to understand the connections. There's blinders on, right? So people are just kind of like tunnel vision towards what, like, yes, of course a woman has the right to choose what she wants to wear, obviously. But okay, but then who is in these movements? Who are leading these movements? Who has the microphone? Who is organizing and that kind of thing? And that's changing. I mean, Quebec is also a very segregated society where outside of the cities and even really outside of Montreal and Gatineau, it's just so white. It's just so white. And so there's still a lot of people that have just never met anybody in their life that wears hijab, which is just like, I mean, ridiculous, but it's just the reality of this province. And so then the fight becomes, okay, so what does the immigration policy look like, and why is it so restrictive, and why is it so requiring people speaking French? And then have feminists been on the front line of the immigration fight? Not really, right? Then you see more of a disconnect between something being very clearly a feminist issue, like the questions of violence, gendered violence, for example, and the difference between that and feminists like going to the barricades for better immigration policy. We're not seeing that.
Well, before I talk about feminists, the feminist movement being co-opted by Western Western imperialism, because that's a perfect segue to that. But before I get into that, let's talk just very briefly about because I did see you and another woman in a discussion about the whole headscarf ban, and the pair of you actually said, like, hey, if a woman wants to wear niqab, burqa, that's okay. But that's actually where I actually do have like a difference of like opinion with you, because for me it's like, okay, like wearing the like a Muslim woman wearing the headscarf, like I don't see like a problem with that. Like I like before, back in my more liberal bigotry days, like I would have that knee-jerk reaction. Now it's like, you know what, it's bullshit. The world is not falling apart just because like a woman wants to wear like their religious symbol and like like have at it. But the burqa and and the niqab, which is explicitly a very patriarchal symbol, like you literally do have like the Taliban who like throw like acid in women's face to make them like like cover up and stuff like that. Like, aren't we tolerating intolerance when we say like, oh yeah, niqab and burqa, that's a-okay?
No, I don't think so. I don't imagine you have many friends who wear niqab.
No, I don't.
You have to.
I don't have many friends, period. But that's
okay. That might be okay. No, I mean, and this is where it's really important to hear the voices of people who choose to wear these things, right? I mean, and I will actually also say, I will have to go in about 20 minutes because I have a very important bike appointment that I've been waiting for 6 weeks. I have to get my bike into the shop.
All right, no problem.
But it's a question of coercion, right? If someone wants to wear a niqab, I mean, I can sit here and go, I don't get that, but who cares? That's not that has nothing to do with me. Does that person deserve to be discriminated against by the state? No, obviously not. Are we talking about Afghanistan? Because if we're talking about Afghanistan, I mean, I'm more interested in talking about Canada's role in completely destabilizing Afghanistan, right? Like there's another way to
exactly.
And I think that the interesting thing about the pandemic was the niqab was a very big debate in Quebec because there was governments trying to stop, the Liberal government tried to stop women wearing niqab from accessing public services. And there was not many niqabis who like took a public tribunal, tribune to say, this is my choice. I wear niqab. I'm comfortable in this. So Quebecers didn't really, and this is the case in the rest of Canada, very, very rarely are we hearing from niqabis themselves saying, why have I chosen to wear this? Because maybe this is a question of just being completely unclear, right? I would never wear that. Why would you wear that? But the pandemic, it's like everybody's face is covered, right? Every single person's face is covered. I went to the rally for Palestine this weekend. I was like, wow, I feel like I'm back in Toronto where I knew niqabis and I'd be in a room full of niqab. Like everybody's face is covered, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, I actually can see what the benefit of covering my face is. People aren't looking at me. I'm anonymous. I don't have to care about what I look like. I don't have to care about putting on makeup if that's something I would normally care about. I save the way I look for the people I live with. Like there's nothing really weird about that, right? No one's entitled to look at me, right? No one's entitled to look at me the way they want to look at me. No one's entitled to say, Nora, I've never seen you wear makeup. Why don't you wear makeup, right? I probably would look much better if I wear makeup. I don't wear it. But it's all about the coercion, right? And so it's like, is there a family structure forcing someone to wear makeup? Is there a family structure, a societal structure forcing someone in niqab? That's what we have to struggle against. And to have like a clear orientation on these issues requires us to be in a room with someone who wears niqab to say, this is why I wear it. And then other people are like, oh, okay, I never really thought about that, right? So then it doesn't become medical.
Well, I don't know how much time we have, but if you could briefly then talk about, actually, how much time do we have actually right now?
I will have to go in 15 minutes.
Okay, then, you know what, what I'm going to do is this. The conversation will be continued because there's so much more that like I do want to like unpack with you. But then the last thing, then then I do want to ask.
And I will say, sorry, and just before you ask that last question, I can make myself available pretty quickly. I mean, it's been when my kids were home, it was impossible. My kids being back at school, I've got tons of opportunity. So we can do it again. we can do it again. I don't know, tomorrow, or I don't know what your schedule is like, but
Actually, yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Well, then the last then the last question I wanted to ask you then is talk how however time you have about the Western imperialists co-opting feminism, because you talked about how all of these people who are rabidly against wearing Muslim wearing headscarves and so forth, a lot of that is coming from right-wing pseudo-feminists and the left, which has just completely dropped the ball. So talk if briefly, if it's possible, about how Western imperialists have basically co-opted feminism, in which we have to go to war because that's how we free women and children from tyrants and so forth.
It's funny because when you say women and children, that stops being feminism and that starts just being straight up patriarchy, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a very fine
people
line.
in general. War. War is a crime against all of humanity. So.
But the argument that you made, because you're repeating arguments that are being made to justify going to war, and it is very interesting how thin that line is between liberating women and protecting women and children. They're they're interchanged. Right. And it depends on your audiences. If you're talking to a bunch of conservative supporters, you'd be like, we're protecting women and children. And if you're talking to a bunch of liberals, it's probably, you can actually use both, liberating women and protecting them. Right. And then people are like, oh, yes, of course, we would invade Afghanistan to do that. So I'm really glad that you asked the question that way, because I think that it just shows that a feminism that is detached from struggle is very easily co-opted, and it can be co-opted by anybody. It could be co-opted by McDonald's. It could be co-opted by the American military. It could be these concepts under neoliberalism, they become meaningless. They become self-identity, right? I'm a feminist, therefore this is feminist, right? And it isn't about self-identity. It isn't about what you say you're going to do. It's about your role within the broader context of what is happening. And so when Canada invaded Afghanistan, and the whole war was over liberating women from the burqa, which is what it was sold to us in Canada, and not sold to us as a clearing the way for a pipeline project, right? Not sold to us as
of course Canada's role in supporting the Taliban all of those years and fighting against and fighting against the communist government, which actually was more feminist than the Taliban, or the fact that the Northern Alliance were also raping women and having little kids as their dancing sex slaves and so forth like that. All of that was completely omitted. And of course, Justin Trudeau is still giving arms to Saudi Arabia, which exports reactionary patriarchy across the world. And yet the wars are still sold to us as we're saving women and children from both an Islamic tyrant and even a secular tyrant in Syria.
And so that just has a direct connection to how feminism has such a strong roots in whiteness, really, in white supremacy in the West. And so because of that, it's very easy to make these arguments. These poor racialized women, they don't understand, they need help, we need to save them. And because it's detached from struggle, almost entirely detached from struggle, that they can say this is a feminist act. And there's not many feminists who can formally refuse to allow them to say that, right? The federal government will only claim something as feminist if they think that there aren't going to be feminist groups ready to set their house on fire for claiming they're feminists, right? And so we're in an era where marketing is just so easy. You can just take any concept you want and you can repackage it and you can sell it. And movements are so weak right now that the movements who should control these concepts, who are the ones who are like, no, you're not taking this from us. You're not using these terms. You're not turning these terms into meaning something that they don't mean. They're just unable to do that. We're just too broken, our movements right now. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And I explain that in the book. And it's neoliberalism is the easiest shorthand way to say that. And so, it's just war propaganda. And it's war propaganda that has a long history in the same kind of war propaganda that justified even the foundation of Canada in the first place. And it's war propaganda that's trying to move with the times and reach people where they're at because feminism is so popular. And so progressive people have to look at this and say, okay, so then how do we, I was going to say, take it back. That's the name of my book. How do we take back these concepts from from power, so that we no longer are having to like, explain how, no, that's not feminist at all. That's actually anti-feminist. That's actually hurting women. That's actually damaging feminist concepts. And this is actually what feminism is. And that's been very difficult because media is very hostile to that. Media is very open to people just declaring that they're a feminist and leaving it at that. But they're very hostile to people like denouncing conservative members of parliament for being anti-feminist when they're clearly being anti-feminist. So this is one of the outcomes of our movements being so damaged and in such kind of disarray right now, that I think as we have to build something together that is that is broader, that is able, thank you, that is able to actually create that confrontation that we need with again, with power, with militarization within the army, within the Canadian government. But that's really, really difficult because you can see it already being remixed again, where Canadian soldiers were training Iraqi agents who would go on to commit war crimes, and the war crimes were filmed, and then the films were shown to the Canadian soldiers, and the soldiers were like, holy shit, we just trained that guy. They brought it to their leadership, and the leadership was like, not our problem. And so this is playing out right now in Canada, and the reforms are saying, well, we need to reform. The calls are we need to reform the military rather than we need to abolish the military as it is. It's a colonial force, it's an occupying force. You cannot reform it, right? So this is, but that's very dangerous to the state, and the state has an interest in making sure that feminism is a word that is more or less meaningless.
And and unfortunately, Miss Loreto has to go, but this is going to be continued because yes, this is going to be continued. We'll try to I'll try to invite you back on. We'll try to do it same time, same place tomorrow because I think we touched on a lot of interesting nerves, and I really do want to definitely continue this conversation. So, Ms. Loreto, thank you for joining me on 1+1. I really look forward to having you back on soon, and hope all is well with you and the family during this ongoing coronavirus time. All right.
Thank you.